тусит. Опять дело. Упс. Сорян. Блин, из-за электричества надо работать, понимаешь? Ну вот нет, ну, что ты имеешь в виду? Ну да, вот понимает он тебя просто, да. Да. Ну вот это и в твоем понимании, ну вы понимаете, короче, да? Да, да, да. Да. Они сами растут, кстати, я тебе секрет раскрою. Никому не говорил. Легче стало жить-то, нет? Со всеми утекающими, конечно. Есть чем заняться. Нет, смотри, все равно не психиатр. Ну, нет. Ну, что теперь сделаешь? Ну, что теперь делаешь? Пьяно Fortnite. Эй, пьяно Fortnite, говорит. Нет, это не лучше. Пролетарно, но как бы осуждаем. Нет, не осуждаем. Ладно, это долго. Но это, ну как бы так. Мое мнение такое. То, что потребление, да, то, что, да, оно все тяготит. То есть ты получаешься всегда слепой. Как бы всегда такой, как женщина, за тобой ухаживают, а ты такой, понимаешь, ну да, не украшает тебя как бы, но с другой стороны, без потребления ты тоже не проживешь. Я тебе про что говорю, да. То есть на него не надо ориентироваться, то есть люди намеренно живут на потребление, ориентируясь, то есть не на то, что, ну да. Ну, понимаешь, короче, да. Да. Ну, вот поставь цель потреблять что-нибудь себе. Прикольно ты себя так почувствуешь индионское просто, да. Да, у тебя помню просто. Потреблять вот такую машину, вот такой коттедж потреблять, это что, это как бы... Ты серьезно, что ли? Вы что, не шутите? Это что, цель, что ли? Ну, нет. Жизнь прошла, что количество детей останется, понимаешь? И, да, понимаешь. А все равно где-то будете заниматься обязательно. Да. А счастье, оно из этого раза состоит, да? Я не буду какие-то гадости говорить. То есть, как бы, вдруг, как бы, есть, можно жить, вдруг бывает такое, что можно жить и как бы, и не Дон Корлеоне, как бы, не понимает все равно. Можно жить и не ненавидеть этот мир и не говорить, типа того. Да, то есть, и в этом мире, ну, типа того, да. Да, не против себя быть, как бы, да. Сразу же намеренно. Секреты не раскрываются, освобождаю тебя от того, что жизнь это страх, от того, что спасаться надо от людей. Да, того, что наделяет тебя страхом, да, и бесстрашным. Да, понимаешь, да. Ну а что сделаешь теперь, жизнь стоит. Я не могу, я не спасаю, меня это не спасает. Да. Тренировка, понимаешь? То есть это, да. Можно быть как вот, да, столько, сколько надо. Нормально, да. Это реально нормально. Просто, да, потому что и это как бы не то, что ты себя искусственно говоришь, просто ты знаешь цену. Да, понимаешь, да. Смотри, противоположная сторона, ты понимаешь, что ради чего, да. Женщинах не надо спрашивать, они радостные должны быть и хорошие. Да, тешные даже как-то согретые. Ладно. Вроде бы годы одинокие. Нет, нет. Ну, понимаете. Ну вот я говорю, то есть вы будете со мной не соглашаться, и вы будете как бы говорить, что да, вот он про это и говорит тебе. Да, и сам с собой, ну как бы, ну, куда деваться, как оно вот на самом деле. Да, то есть, ну, значит, я ошибся, мне просто так показалось, то есть, что жить нельзя, я такой, опа, жить вообще никак нельзя, то есть, вообще, ну, ну, нет, да, то есть, ты всегда будешь плохой девочкой или мальчиком, да. Ладно. Ладно, все, я мечтаюсь. Против вообще всего. Да. Я повторяю еще раз. Вот иммунитет, например, да? То есть, как бы, то есть ты все равно вынужден кого-то убивать. То есть, потому что, да, ну так и соляви, как говорится, да. Ну, да, но не настолько много, как нам кажется, да. То есть неприятно же, не хочется никого убивать. Это травмуть просто, да, понимаете. И опять, ну да, может даже так, то есть не понимает он тебя. Может и это тоже, да. То есть, да, ну все равно, то есть как бы, просто, ну понимаешь, да. Вообще о чем-то это ем. Кашу надо было поставить, а то опять это самое. Ладно, наоборот все получается. Это я так просто придумал, я вообще просто дурак дурной, я просто не надо. Просто не надо. нормально даже как-то это самое, да. Качество еще было бы связи. Эй, пиано, этот, пиано-лист, что там, пиано будет, да. Я поражен, понимаешь, но это никто ведь не говорит. Я не знаю, думайте сами. Меня это не впечатлило. Вот когда мне в советские времена, ну когда я был маленький, мне говорили даже про это. Ну хорошо, но не принято так в семье у нас было, да, наверное, просто вот это вот, да. То есть труд уважать. Понимать, что все сделано трудом, как бы, да, типа, я этого не понимаю просто. Да. Факт действительности, вот просто так вот он на самом деле. Просто ведь ты даже ничего учиться. То есть как он. Да. Еще один факт. Дети не зарабатывают денег вообще. То есть просто так. Даже если ты пытаешься, это уже незаконно, если ты так говоришь, да, понимаешь. Ну если ты пытаешься из него делать будущее. Ну дети, в смысле, маленькие дети, которые там детсадовские, там какие-то. Я про это говорю, а ты свои какие-то штуки. Это просто факт, что дети, они как бы, ну, они трудиться не могут. Не хватает зумов. То есть, да. Если ты начинаешь что-то с ними производить, то это уже незаконно будет. Я понял уже просто, да. На себя так. Это так, к воспитанию только. Это просто из этих, можно сказать, что очень много всего, если, ну ладно, ты не согласен. А мне кажется, что очень много чего. Просто как бы сразу же этим решается. Дети не производят ничего, денег у них нету, они их не зарабатывают, понимаешь? Следовательно говоря, да, непонятно. То есть, значит, у них не должно быть денег в руках, они не умеют, им нельзя деньги давать вообще. Вообще. Да, то есть, да. Все как бы, и все, можно на этом вопрос вообще закрывать. То есть всех остальных не существует просто вопросов. Но тебе есть чем заняться в этом, вот тебе будет, да. И поэтому, да, понимаешь. Женщин не надо трогать, они как бы умеряют нас просто. Она переживает. Да, ладно, не надо. Да. Ну ладно, это не будем говорить. Успокойте, полюбите маму, и все нормально. Понимаете? Все, все, понимает. наверное. Нет, кстати, вот это я тоже себе говорю, да. Как умственные навыки быстрее тренируются или нет? Да. Как их от физических Простите, что это, где я? так нет. Как алкоголь, короче, да. М? Пальмани. Интересно. Пальмани. Санк. Ваши кэри. Ваши кэри. Кисовичи. Посмотрим сами. Ичи-бричи. Потому что ты не знаешь. Понимаешь. Сыр в масле. Мне кажется, как сыр в масле, да? И просто как... Так. Опа. Что закатываешь? 2 рубля. Ну что такое? Мало. Я так думаю, или нет? Не хер, да? Я все нормально. что-то там, что-то еще там. Перегрузка. Перегружаем. На 1 мил. На 1 мил. Точнее, это. На 1 ламбер мил. Ладно. Для. Money. Survive. Survive. Can you survive? Can you survive? Survive. That's all fine. It's all young. Best aunt. Best aunt. Polite. Polisi Cristiano. Наверное, I would recommend you for the people. Да, он не понимает, don't understand. Ничего здесь. Да, учитель. На игре. Ну вот это имеется, вот это я говорю. А, это. Нет, я тут. Это просто да. It's my. Да, тепло любви, души частичка для тебя, да. Это зачем, да, зачем. Маш. Да. Да нет, просто так. Давай. Хулио. Мар. Перебежчик смотрит. Наоборот. Да, вот это есть. Да. Наоборот. Вот нет. Вот это и было на самом деле. Да. Well, regret. Так. Это не факт, что будет съемно. Конечно, конечно, всем, если буду еще будет очень. Золди. Золди. Ship. Did you know? Yeah. Great guy, great man. Hey, what's up? Just kitchen, just not wash. Выйти. Cuidamos. Cuidados. Врыти. Можете. Hey, what's up? Thanks, man. Thanks, people. Great. Greetings. Greetings. Yeah. Bush? Kind of bush. What have you seen? No, I'm not going to hack your computer, buddy. Yeah, it's fine. I got it. Yeah, just kidding. Yeah, actually. Practice. Chop. Thank you. Trying to do my best. Do, yeah. To, Hancha. Yeah. So like this, yeah. It's the best, yeah, the best. Wet hands, wet silk appeal. Actually, I'm a politician, я политическом, про тебя и говорил, да, ну ладно, you can't evade the politics, the greediness of this world, and the kindness, yeah, so it's гай. Гай. Оля. Feeding time. Soon coming. No. Forget. Totally. Ending is covered. Just kidding. Don't make me laugh. Vegan. Просто. Ну, не вовремя поехал. Я вдруг смотрел телевизор. Ну, не вовремя покакал. Нет, не забыл. Там еще есть. Тетя говорит, не покиш. Discourage. Это вы собираете? ugly. No. Ренечки. Keep sweeper. That is it. Is that okay? That be? Ну, короче, можно сделать. Ну, чтобы делали нормально. Very good. Very good. Listen to me, to him, to her, him. Это что он говорит? Сейчас нет, печально, да.
soup is almost ready.
Fine. Сбербанк. Чуть-чуть играли ты, чуть-чуть играли ты. Смотри, если будешь feed your time, фидер. Так, подожди. Oniosity, Onionis. Very flashy, very camarade. Too bad things. Yes, move on. Показывай меня. Егор, опять. Who is your... Come out. Поехали ты просто все. Heater. Monoliter. Who's there? Oh, almost me. Almost eaten. Oh, it's so hot. Hush. Cristiano. Очень хороший была, мама злая была, как собака, ребята. Так нормально у нее все. Так нормально. Хороший, Ну, у меня хороший человек, хороший. А чё ты, блин, издеваешься-то? Не тебе сейчас издеваю, ну, а чё? Ну и чё теперь? Я себе так говорю. Хороший говори. А вообще лично, наоборот, себе это хорошо. Ну, какая разница, кто как что говорит, все равно все как вот оно есть. Потому что... Сам не говоришь. Да. А что хорошо, что плохо? Хорошо, что жизнь продолжает, да? А то, что, да, понимаю, да. Нет, только себе то, что полезно, да? Хорошо, да. Есть такое хорошо, которое полезно всем, согласен, да? Это точно я тебе говорю, да. Когда я понимаю, да. Его только надо, как бы, да, понимаю, да. Да. Видишь, ты с любой стороны приходишь туда же все, да. Если ты идешь. Наверное, идти не надо, если ты добрый просто, да, понимаешь, ну да. Вот и не надо, и все. Нет, зачем она так говорила-то? Хорошая настроение, да. Здоровая мама, ты здоровая, ты же. Ладно, знаешь, еще. Ладно. Слушай, ругаешь меня, ты был. Пошел на... Что будет с редисом? Наверное, съедят редис, не будет. Поедят или что? Зачем? Буханки. Альбом из буханок, умеешь? Только Ференсис такой.
Я бы сравнила его с Нео из «Матрицы». Хотя сейчас он ближе к Морфеусу.
Американские регуляторы не согласились с нашим видением мира. Вот он сейчас только что их послал куда подальше, а они их проглотили. Что пошло не так?
Let me ask you a question. What color is a video game explosive barrel? Is it green? Purple? No, of course not. Generic video game explosive barrels are red. Of course they are. Explosive red barrels are in the Doom games, they're in Hitman, they're in Zelda, and they're even in real-time strategy games like Command & Conquer. Explosive barrels are everywhere, even in places where they have no logical reason to exist. And yet, the history of barrels as a game design element goes back to the earliest days of the medium. So why do these things keep popping up over and over again? And why do so many games use barrels in the exact same way? Well, that's because generic video game explosive barrels aren't just barrels. I mean, they are barrels, but they're also something else as well. And that is a symbol. The explosive barrels represent a very useful and versatile design element, particularly in shooters. A stationary target that, when used correctly, has the potential to do massive damage, but also represents a potential threat to the player. This creates a very fun dynamic that encourages good positioning, timing, and planning to get the most out of the explosion, whilst also staying safe yourself. It's not hard to see why FPS games would want something barrel-esque in their levels. But why this uniform shape and colour? Well, the red part is easy. It's a colour that we normally associate with risk and danger, and is very eye-catching at a glance, communicating to players who aren't familiar with the concept that these things are dangerous, even before they've realised the barrels can explode. It's worth noting that Doom, one of the games responsible for popularising explosive barrels in the first place, made them this ugly, hard-to-spot grey colour, which often meant you accidentally kill yourself before you managed to spot them, with subsequent games learning from its mistake. The shape has a similar story. It's understated enough that it can be used in many environments without feeling out of place, whilst also being iconic enough to recognise immediately. As the explosive barrel was popularised by 90s shooters, it became easier for new games to simply include barrels of their own, rather than invent whole new items that did more or less the same thing, because audiences were already familiar with what barrels did and how to use them. Just like that, barrels became a symbol. They aren't just a level feature or a mechanic, they communicate a specific challenge and style of gameplay in a near-universal visual language. Barrels are such a video game staple that people even say that they're overused and too much of a game design trope, and several video games have lampshaded their inclusion as well. You know what sucks? Here we are, in the middle of South America. All special operations up, still blowing up barrels. These people are, of course, wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Barrels aren't the only video game symbol. There is an entire hidden gaming language we don't ordinarily notice that teaches us how to play, adds that extra level of immersion, and even controls our decision making, all communicated through symbology. Take spikes, for example, the universal video game symbol for don't touch this. Because the painful sensation of touching something sharp and a subsequent aversion to spiky things is common to everyone but the kinkiest of masochists, and the fact that they're very easy to draw with just a couple of pixels, spikes became the optical of choice for early platformers, and later became a staple trope. This led to games branching out into something like thorns, teeth, and saw blades that retained the same spiky iconography, and in doing so, sidestepped the need to teach players what these obstacles do, because their function and effect is obvious from the start. Symbols and iconography are even useful out. Led to games branching out into something sharp, and a subsequent aversion to spiky things is common to everyone but the kinkiest of masochists, and the fact that they're very easy to draw with just a couple of pixels, spikes became the optical of choice for early platformers, and later became a staple trope. This led to games branching out into something like thorns, teeth, and saw blades that retain the same spiky iconography, and in doing so, sidestep the need to teach players what these obstacles do, because their function and effect is obvious from the start. Symbols and iconography are even useful outside of actual gameplay, and are a huge part of intuitive and efficient UI design. Take this little fella. What does this mean? Well, it's obviously the symbol for saving your game. We can see it in Celeste, Superliminal, Cave Story, and many other more recent games. However, as people old enough to recognize it will know, the save icon is actually depicting a floppy disk, a piece of technology that has been obsolete for upwards of 25 years. The fact that we don't use floppy disks anymore is irrelevant, because the save symbol communicates a very specific message in a universal way, and it's come to mean so much more than just the icon for an out-of-date storage medium. Symbols can come in all shapes and sizes, and make up some of the foundational tropes of the medium and culture in general. The most amazing part is that good use of symbolism is basically invisible, with games communicating details and changing our state of mind without us ever really being aware of it. For example, if you've ever played a Legend of Zelda game, you'll know what a boss monster having a big glowing eye is. Yep, it's an obvious invitation for you to shoot an arrow or swing a sword at their weak point to do massive damage. It is obviously aware of it. For example, if you've ever played a Legend of Zelda game, you'll know what a boss monster having a big glowing eye means. Yep, it's an obvious invitation for you to shoot an arrow or swing a sword at their weak point to do massive damage. It is obviously a huge coincidence that a large proportion of gathered minions just so happen to share the same weakness, but as far as the gameplay experience is concerned, it's very useful. Leaving players to fumble around just trying to work out how to damage a boss is very much fun, so it's better to communicate the exact nature of the challenge they're facing right away with something obvious and universal, rather than play coy and make the boss fight less engaging purely for the sake of realism. On a similar note, even the architecture of game levels can act in a symbolic fashion. Architecture on this channel? What am I thinking, right? Pre-boss rest spots that give players a chance to save their game, heal up, and maybe buy some items before a boss fight have become part of the language of level design as people learn to recognize these sorts of routes and the tough battles that inevitably follow them. These areas now communicate to players an opportunity to prepare themselves both physically and mentally, and are a great place to take a little break or go and make yourself a drink, because there's likely to be a stretch of hard gameplay right beyond the next door. One of the most effective ways to change how a player thinks lies in a set of symbols that are a little bit more abstract though, namely, colours. You might not think that colour conveys anything more than visual information, but it's been a huge part of how games talk to players since the days of arcade machines when palettes were very limited. We already know that red symbolises danger, but all colours have their place in the symbolic vocabulary. Purple is a colour that's used all over the place as a shorthand for corruption, evil, and general villainy. This is because purple is a very rare and valuable pigmentation in nature, giving environments an alien quality and drawing allusions to royalty when used as part of character design. Also, in the days when sprite artists didn't have as many colours to work with, purple was a great accent colour for dark and evil-looking environments and characters, a tradition that's continued even as graphics tech has improved. Take a look at this area from Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Simply by changing the primary colour on display, this entire area goes from happy and full of life to eerie and corrupted in a matter of moments. It's also important to think think about the contrast and relationship between colours. You might have noticed that despite being a fixture in most games, health as a concept has no commonly associated colour. Sometimes it's depicted as being red, green, or even sometimes blue or white. This is because on top of having no physical, real-world analog to draw from, it's more important for health to be visible than it is for it to convey a consistent theme across games. In Doom's orange and grey environments, health is blue because it stands out in a firelight. In Darkest Dungeon, health is red to accentuate the stark colour palettes, and in games where you need to view the health of both allies and enemies, or your remaining health quickly, green is often used as it contrasts nicely with red. One of the most universal colour symbols is light itself. Humans are naturally drawn to it, and so light is used all over the place as a navigational aid. In Dark Souls, the light of even unlit bonfires can be seen from miles away. In Journey, the big laser beam coming out of the mountain helps to orient you in the seemingly endless desert of the game's first half, and the Uncharted games even use colours normally associated with light, primarily yellow, to subtly guide players through the platforming sections. When you actually think about it, it's insane that someone would have run ahead of Nathan Drake and the gang spray painting all the ledges yellow, but that doesn't really matter, because the most important qualities of effective symbology are that it's memorable and that it communicates its meaning intuitively, not necessarily that it makes perfect sense. This is why the classical elements of earth, water, fire and air, as well as a bunch of other ones depending on where you come from, have remained such powerful symbols in human culture in spite of their obvious scientific wrongness. They're evocative and come with a whole host of cultural assumptions about how they ought to work, as well as what they ought to feel like to play around with. When we see, for example, fire, it symbolises so much more to us than simply the fact there's a combustion reaction going on. Fire communicates risk, passion, danger, and having that reflected in gameplay feels very satisfying, because it harmonises with our inherent cultural assumptions. Similarly, when games play with fire as a theme, it nearly always translates into high-risk, aggressive playstyles. Matching the Gathering's red deck centre on all-out aggression, Lena the Fire Mage in Dota spams high-damage spells, and the Pyro in Team Fortress 2 is all about charging into the fight at short range. Not only does this theme add to the fun of playing these characters, but their design quickly gets across what they're all about, even for people who've never seen them before. There's no reason why you can't have a slow, bulky, defensively oriented character designed to look like a fire elemental or something, but that lack of symbolic and mechanical harmony will always make them feel a little bit weird to play. Water is another classic element that has a strong presence in video games. Purely by existing in the world and being alive, we have a strong intuitive grasp of fluid mechanics and what water does when it interacts with various other things. For example, Noita doesn't need to explain how its many different fluids work together and interact, because stuff like water putting out fire and oil floating on top are interactions that intuitively make sense. Similarly, wet enemies being vulnerable to electrocution in Breath of the Wild and water freezing when it's exposed to ice attacks in Genshin Impact are particularly scientific interactions, but they do make a lot of intuitive sense. And so players never need to be taught about these mechanics, they'll discover them naturally through play. In short, when games have mechanics that match up thematically with their chosen symbology, not only can players internalise them much more comfortably, but they're also much easier to remember. And elemental symbols are some of the longest lived and most successful ones in history for exactly this reason. However, this is where the downsides of leaning too hard on symbology start to become apparent. While leveraging the appeal of having our expectations met is great, if developers don't add enough of their own flair to level your characters, the symbols and associated tropes can end up overpowering the rest of the level design. Mario games love using themed worlds because the aesthetic symbology is a great way of telling players what to expect. Ice levels are going to have slippery floors, Bowser levels are going to have traps and lava, you get the picture. However, this rigid adherence to theming can lead to levels feeling samey and kind of generic, so it's important to give players what they want, but also surprise them with new takes on established ideas. For example, when developing Shovel Knight, Yacht Club used classic level design tropes, but also went out of their way to spruce up these tired concepts with new ideas, satisfying players looking for that classic feel, but also developing a unique identity, with wading beetles you've got to bounce on to get through lava levels, and ice levels with aurora spewing fountains used to cross gaps. These places still are both classic ice and fire levels, being based around lengthy horizontal platforming gauntlets and terrain you can't trust respectively, but put that little bit of extra work in to view those tired tropes from a new perspective. Sometimes, developers can even lose control of their symbology and end up communicating things to players that they weren't intending. It's important for cover shooters like Gears of War to subtly teach players to distinguish between what is and is not cover through consistent size and shape of boxes, barriers, and bits of rock, to avoid players accidentally trying to hide behind scenery. However, players can often get a little bit too good at spotting obligatory chest-high walls. In my otherwise beloved Mass Effect 2, there's a mission that sees you exploring an abandoned collected ship. That is until chest-high walls start appearing, which immediately inform you there's a fight coming, spoiling the surprise when the bugmen inevitably turn up. Of course, it's also worth mentioning that many of gaming's most effective symbols can also exclude people with disabilities. Red barrels aren't going to be anywhere near as effective to someone who's colorblind, for example, meaning that developers need to double or triple up on the symbols in order to ensure that the message gets across for everyone. People often like to point to tropes and common symbols like chest-high walls or barrels as proof of lazy, uninspired game design. But the truth of the matter is that these things are an inescapable part of the gaming vocabulary and carry with them decades of crucial culture and lessons relevant to both designers and players. If developers went out their way to avoid using these kinds of symbols, we'd be left with games that feel less intuitive to play and less thematically consistent without much in the way of advantages. By drawing on the shared cultural knowledge between developers and players, games can bridge the gap of communication between the two sides and allow the people who make games to better explain what the things they make are all about, whilst also letting the people who play them enjoy a more immersive, seamless experience. So the next time you see an explosive barrel, or an out-of-place weak point, or even a nature-themed character who just so happens to specialise in healing, consider that this isn't lazy game design, but instead a way for the developer to tell you, the player, what to expect and which ways to have the most fun. Because, let's be honest, just pointing out the tropes and pretending like that's all it takes to be a media critic makes us no better than CinemaSins, which, it's not exactly a high bar, is it? Hello, viewers! First of all, don't worry, the end of year special is about halfway done and well and truly on the way. It'll be out after Christmas once all the sales have started, which, actually, now that I think about it, they may have done by the time this goes out to the public. Who knows? Anyway, while you wait, how about checking out Eurothug 4000, or as she's otherwise known, Maria. All of her videos are incredibly lovely and are just fantastic video game related comfort food. A particular favourite one is her video on size differences in games, because it's a topic I tried and failed to write about around 6 months ago, and this video covers pretty much everything I was going to say in around half the time. She's great, please do give her a watch. Though it does go without saying that the greatest people of all are my patrons, who get to enjoy behind the scenes stuff, bonus content, and even shoutouts like what I'm going to do now. A special top tier thank you to Alex the Launch, Andrew Lebrano, Asaran, Ashley Shade, Alsacav, Baxter Heel, Big Chess, Brian Notariani, Konstantin Punkt, Daniel Medges, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Carabel, Ecton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Evie, Philip Magnus, Gazkul, George Sears, Gretar Hanneson, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jesse Ryan, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, Joshua Binswanger, Janos Fakete, Kai Gillespie, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Lunar Eagle 1996, Mace Window 54, Max Filipov, Nate Graff, NWDD, Patrick Romberg, Philby the Milby, Rededex, there is a D in there I forgot to write down ages ago, my apologies, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Samuel Vanderplatz, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strategy in Ultima, Tom the Fizz, and Chow. Okay, thank you for watching, happy Festag, and I will see
Of course.
Chris here from Kramagar Connect. If you've always wanted to learn how to fight, I've got a free PDF that's got over 66 fast fight moves anyone can learn. Simply print it out and use it as a reference guide next time you practice your...
what happened to Dawn of War 3. It came out last year with quite a lot of hype behind it. It was the next entry in one of the last great RTS series out there, made by a veteran developer. And then it came out, I don't know, it's not like there was this massive negative backlash or anything, but it fell by the wayside after about a week. A truly terrible game would have a list of complaints a mile long. But getting to the bottom of what caused Dawn of War 3 to fail without playing it is really tricky. That's because making a good sequel is even harder. On one hand, you've got to give people what they like, but you've also got to iterate and change. A good sequel can be defined in these two ways. It needs to iterate on the previous game, offering a different viewpoint or improving the experience, and it needs to, well, you know, still be good. In order for a sequel to be a progression or an improvement on the previous entry, it needs to carry over some of the same ideas that are present in both entries. This is what I'm going to call the core. The bit of the game that's so integral to the experience that without it, it wouldn't be the same game anymore. Despite any number of iterations of the rules, the story, the graphics and stuff, the core of the gameplay experience still remains. What's the core of Dark Souls? Is it the story? Well, no, I'm pretty sure no one except eVGENIY actually cares about that. What about the gloomy neo-gothic aesthetic? Not really. The combat system? Well, it certainly supports the core experience, but I think the core of Dark Souls is the challenge. The tough but fair gauntlet of boss fights and the smaller, equally tough enemies that lead up to them. Each of the games in the Souls series is very different, but there's no denying the presence of this unifying core. Dark Souls 1 created the foundation, but the bosses were a bit hit and miss in places, and the game was severely lacking in polish. 2 iterated on this by tightening up the controls, adding some quality of life changes, and making sweeping balance adjustments like nerfing Estus flasks so they couldn't be used to avoid damage outright, and made some tweaks to how stats worked in order to make more weapon types and playstyles viable. Dark Souls 3 was another interpretation of the original game, with faster paced, more aggressive combat, and a renewed focus on even meatier boss fights. Despite personal preferences between them, it's clear to see that the core went unchanged, even when the series branched out into stuff like Bloodborne. So, answer me this. What's the core of Dawn of War? I can't work it out. Each of the 3 games operate differently. It's really hard to find a shared mechanical foundation upon which the series rests, beyond the fact that they're all real-time strategy games in the 40k universe. These games are different to Dark Souls because, for whatever reason, they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and start over with every successive iteration. This is the reason why there's such a wide gulf between fans of Dawn of War 1 and Dawn of War 2. Most either prefer one game or the other, because each game has a very different core. To understand what people love so much about the previous 2 games, let's go back in time 10 or so years to play Dawn of War 1. The footage you're seeing here is from Dark Crusade. It's not the most recent expansion, but it's pretty much universally agreed to be the best one. Namely because it doesn't have the overpowered factions and rubbish air units introduced in Soulstorm, the final expansion. Dawn of War 1 is a macro RTS in every sense of the word. It's all about fighting big battles with big armies, with a focus on acquiring territory and coordinating large groups of units, rather than effective use of abilities and time positioning. Though of course those things are still pretty important. People love this game because it was all about macro play and high-level decision-making, while still maintaining the viscerality and campiness of the tabletop game. Dawn of War 1 is very much a traditional RTS, but it separates itself from the likes of StarCraft and Command & Conquer by focusing on spectacle and a much slower, deliberate pace of combat. Jump forward 5 years and contrast that with Dawn of War 2, which ditched base building and big armies in exchange for a small group of squads led by a powerful hero unit. While they might look cosmetically similar, there's a lot that's been chopped and changed since Dawn of War 1. Artillery, ultimate units and static emplacements have been ditched in favour of much more micro-intensive units such as heavy weapons teams, which require setting up prior to a fight, also a revamped, much more important cover system, and heroes taking centre stage on the battlefield. This leads to a game that focuses much more on small, action-packed skirmishes where every unit counts and tactics is king, rather than management and planning ability. These games are completely different, cater to very different kinds of players. Players who like Dawn of War 1 for macro strategy and titanic battles might have pared down more fiddly game wait for them in Dawn of War 2. Conversely, those who like the sequel will play Dawn of War 1 and say that it's shallow, snowballing and drawn out. The core of these 2 experiences just isn't the same. This is most easily seen in the single-player modes for each game. Dawn of War 1 has a huge battle map where you control one faction of 7 and have to coordinate a war to take over this planet by moving your army around. It's pretty neat, the whole thing plays out like a tabletop game. It's a great way of shaking up what's essentially a series of skirmishes by adding some cool alternate mission setups, like this one where you've got a massive fixed army and have to take down a mega base, or these missions that involve you sieging an enemy fortress. The world map adds another layer of macro strategy on top of a game that's already about build orders and army composition, by giving you an overarching goal to deal with. Dawn of War 2 single player, on the other hand, it's like if someone made Diablo into an RTS. No, I'm dead serious. You control a party of 4 heroes, and it's your job to chew through legions of dumb goons by using abilities and picking the right gear. There's quite a lot of depth to the combat, actually, from what gear to pick to setting up cover and firing arcs to fighting real, honest-to-God bosses in an RTS. The Dawn of War 2 campaign is absolutely nuts, but it's also tactics at its most raw and intimate, stripping away base building, making units and tech trees in favour of a game where every little move counts and you actually get attached to your little Space Marine goons. While these games might be poorly constructed as a series, it's kind of okay because they're both great games by their own merits. The issues start when you don't actually know what people want in your games because you've got no idea what the core of your series actually is. That's what frustrates me about the whole Dawn of War 3 sucks because they tried to make it into a MOBA argument. That's a symptom of the problem, not the cause. The list of mechanics from MOBAs that Dawn of War 3 has that 2 doesn't is actually pretty slim. They've both got bases defended by turrets, hero units, farming, etc. The difference between them comes in Relic missing what people actually liked about the first 2 games. On the surface, Dawn of War 3 is actually quite sleek. The game is responsive, the UI is nice, the graphics are great, and it seems to be trying to strike a middle ground between its 2 predecessors. On one hand, proper base building is back, and so are listening posts, and so are most of the old units from Dawn of War 1. On the other, dedicated hero units are still about, though even more powerful this time around, so are heavy weapons teams, and also a few targeted abilities from Dawn of War 2. But from the first mission of the campaign, I could tell something was off when I forgot what units I had and what they could do. See, in both of the other Dawn of Wars, units were distinctive and had a variety of functions, even on the most basic of levels. Nowhere can this be seen more clearly than in the humble Space Marine tactical team. In Dawn of War 1, you had a bunch of modular upgrades with which to customize the squad. Sergeants that boost morale, targetable grenades, and multiple copies of 4 different alternate weapons, from flamethrowers to missile launchers, all on a single faction's basic ranged unit. Dawn of War 2's tactical marines have 3 mutually exclusive weapon upgrade choices, an optional sergeant, and 2 activatable abilities. One that increases damage against armoured units, and one with a long cooldown that makes them temporarily immune to suppression. Despite being examples of 2 very different design philosophies, each version of the tactical squad gives players a buttload of choices. So what about Dawn of War 3? They can shoot guns. Alright, in fairness, they have a choice between a flamer, which gives them a simple
Невада. Невада.
человеку удалось сделать сначала одну популярную соцсеть, а потом
Телефон, скажи мне, как я играю, кое-как или как еще? Да, типа того. Не знаю. Ну да, ладно. Сам, короче, сам. Впереди. Это нет у тебя, у меня. Звой. Не знаю, не знаю. Что, я упал. Присоединяешься Джон Свич. Джон. Патейтин, есть еще патейтин. Картофелин, знаешь такой, да? Сейчас, то же самое поставить. Застрял.
Готшалк. Божественные белки. Нет?
Сначала у вас будут мурашки по коже.
Что?
Потом будете хотеть его снова и снова.
И поймете, что под силу.
Hey everyone, it's time for What Happened, a series of video essays gussied up like a cheesy game show to soften the blow of hearing about these sad stories from the video game and movie industries. I'm talking like this right now because I gotta be honest, this is gonna be a rough one, folks. Now, when we last left Yuji Naka, legendary game producer during Sega's heyday, before moving on to Square Enix in 2018 in an unknown capacity. That capacity is now very well known. Balan Wonderland is what Yuji Naka has been up to since he joined Square Enix some 3 years ago. But before that, he had spent more than a decade at Probe, the company he established after he jumped from the smoking, exploding, nose-diving plane crash that was the Sonic 06 disaster. Probe produced more humble, experimental titles like Let's Tap, Ivy the Kiwi, and Rodeo the Sky Soldier. It's been like 30 seconds since we started the episode, and I've already mentioned another game. I'm gonna have to talk about it another time. Anyway, Probe was a small company, and while their games certainly had some charm, they nevertheless weren't really big money spinners, which is triply so with Sky Soldier. During this same time, Naka also contributed to a few outside titles, and one that's of particular note is We Play Motion, which, if you don't remember, and I assume no one but Scott the Woz even does, was a minigame collection that was designed by multiple studios. Now, the main developer of We Play Motion was a company called Arzest. They handled the programming and other technical aspects, while completely separate studios designed the actual mechanics of the minigames. Why is this important? Well, this two-way style development must have struck a chord with Yuji Naka because once the financial fallout of Rodeo was apparent, Naka then joined up with Square Enix, as stated earlier, and Probe was shut down, except they weren't. Strangely, Naka confirmed as late as 2018 that the company is technically not dead, as it still has one single employee. That's weird. Anyway, let's move on. Not long after he was hired, a subsidiary was formed around Naka to develop titles under the Square Enix umbrella, games that they wouldn't normally publish. Now, originally, Naka's first inclination was to make something simple and accessible, and had planned to make that a social-focused game for mobile phones. Shinji Hashimoto, however, an executive officer, persuaded Naka to change course and to start work on a platformer. He needed approval from the other heads of Square Enix first, of course, but once that was granted, the subsidiary was named Balan Company, and as we'll see, wasn't set up like a traditional studio at all. Their business model was centered around a core group of designers and artists who would do the planning and pre-production work, and once that was done, would then hire another company to handle the programming and asset building, which is pretty neat, I guess, although it does sound familiar. Where have I heard of that before? I just can't remember. Alright. That's not to say that this style of game development can't and hasn't worked in the past. It's just, well, it's possibly a contributing factor as to why what happened. So what platformers had Arzest worked on that impressed Naka and Square Enix so much that they decided that they were the team to hire? Well, that would be Yoshi's New Island, Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games, 3DS, I think that counts. And hey, Pikmin, that 2D action-focused Pikmin spin-off that you only just now remembered even existed because I just told you. And that's it. But that's fine. That's fine. Everyone needs to start somewhere, right? The same team that made Devil May Cry 2 made Devil May Cry 3, for crying out loud. But here's the thing. The general plan from the start for Balan Wonderland's... Wait, Balan... It's not called Wonder... It's called Wonder World? Then why have I been calling it Wonderland?
Why didn't someone tell me? Oh, I've been making an idiot out of myself.
General plan from the start for Balan Wonderworld's development had a few red flags that were slowly being raised. Some things were just... It was just worrying. Even though the genre and platforms had changed, what remained was Yuji Naka's desire to design the game to be as accessible to the widest amount of people, with children being cited as a major demographic that they wanted to target. This would explain the general theme, the playable children avatars, and the art style, but it would best explain the game's incredibly simplistic mechanics. You can jump, sometimes collect a few things, and finally you put on dozens and dozens of costumes which do one thing and one thing only. Literally, every button you press on your controller does the one special move specific to that costume. Some costumes do not allow you to jump, for example. Others don't really allow you to attack, and so on. Now, if they wanted to design a game to appeal to children, keeping things as simple as possible makes sense, but there has to be a balance between simplicity and engagement. Noriyoshi Fujimoto, the game's producer, stated, "One of our goals for development was to create a game with every kind of action, to put in over 80 different kinds of action. But even if you include a huge variety of actions in-game, it's difficult to map all those to the buttons. It's difficult for the player to remember them all, and it's difficult to create the opportunity to use them all. When we were thinking about how to make it easy for the player to understand and use all the actions to their fullest, we came up with the idea of having only one action per costume. This meant we could make the action controls intuitive, and the gameplay simple enough to be enjoyed by anyone." Now I, and I'm sure many of you probably just said this to yourselves, well then don't make 80 actions then. Yes, designing 80 specific special moves and having you collect them one at a time and limiting all other actions does make things technically simpler, but also makes it far slower, limited, and way more tedious. This decision was fundamental in dooming Balan Wonderworld from the very beginning, as it did quite the opposite from allowing all ages to enjoy it. Its plotting pace, simple puzzles, and brain-dead combat was clearly designed with the younger set in mind, completely ostracizing older fans who had grown up with Balan's inspirations, Sonic and Knights. Almost every mechanic or artistic choice is clearly lifted from both, except the ones that made those games so engaging. The real drive during development seems to have been to make as many costumes as possible. That was the goal, and that was going to be the appeal. A real back-of-the-box feature, see? Now, in a lot of typical game development cycles, you tend to over-design, to make too much of one thing, and then have to scale it back, to focus on a set of mechanics. But that wasn't the case with Balan. In interviews, Naka and others said they assumed they'd have to make lots of cuts and to focus on a smaller number of costumes. But then they just decided, fuck it, why not put all of them in there? Well, when you have 80 different weapons or characters or power-ups, you're inevitably going to wind up with a lot of superfluous ones, and it's no different here. This then makes level design tricky, because since the game lacks any central mechanics or moves, you're required to constantly switch out costumes, and it's the only way to progress.
Додо Пицце 10 лет. В честь праздника мы хотим разыграть 10 тысяч пиц и показать, как за это время смогли дойти от Калининграда до самой Камчатки. Теперь от...
Куда идешь?
This is very much unlike many Sonic or Mario or any other platforms really, where most of the power-ups are optional or permanent and not forcing you to laboriously navigate through 80 of them to find what you want. And for the sake of argument, let's just say they decided in the last few months of development, let's just cut out like 70% of these powers and then just rebuild all the levels to support those better. Well, that would have been a monumental amount of work. See, they wanted to make the game available to as many people as possible on as many devices as possible, which included the Switch, the PC, the PS4, the Xbox One, the Xbox Series X, and the PS5. The amount of testing, balancing, polishing, and optimization required to make such a change across all versions would have delayed it way past an acceptable point for Square Enix, and throwing brand new consoles in the mix like the PS5 and the Series X also complicated matters even further. This is due to the fact that when asked about what platforms Balan would bow on, Hashimoto offered, whenever you're developing on a pre-launch development console, the tricky thing that many may not realize is if you encounter a bug, it takes more time to resolve, whether it was a problem with the game or a problem with the hardware. On the other hand, the overwhelming specs of the console meant that some technical limitations we faced previously were removed completely. This meant we got a bit carried away with the excitement, coming up with more and more costumes we wanted to add in during development. Now, because they had so many costumes, it presented a problem. How do you design levels that can account for all these various factors and options? You don't want one part of the stage to be accessible while wearing a specific costume it's not meant for, letting the player easily break the game. You also have to consider enemy placement. How can you predict what power-up the player has before every enemy encounter? Well, what did they do? They used an AI algorithm to scale difficulty, to place the power-ups and the enemy spawns within every level. So yeah, if you've played Balan Wonderworld and you find it kinda bland, generic, by the numbers, formulaic, binary, well, there's a reason. A portion of the game was designed by Skynet. Now, one of the game's positives, its gorgeous CGI animated cutscenes, has its origin, and that origin was that they were never meant to be included at all. The design team at Balan Company only incorporate in-game cutscenes to push the narrative. VisualWorks, Square Enix's own in-house CGI subsidiary, who are responsible for some stunning shit, campaigned and lobbied to work on the project. So the fact that the best part of the game wasn't originally going to be in the game at all is a little unbelievable. The game was first unveiled with a trailer in 2020, and a lot of people were excited. No one knew what Yuji Naka had been working on, and now it's going to be a big mascot platformer, and he's teamed up with Sonic's original visual designer Naoto Oshima after 20 years, and it has the backing of Square Enix? What could go wrong? The demo is what could go wrong. Balan Wonderworld's public demo damaged the game's image immeasurably. Instead of reaffirming people's positive vibes they had going in, the game's simplistic design, glacial pace, and dumbed-down difficulty was put on display for all the world to play. Previews, impressions, videos, and hot takes exploded all over the dream world that is cyberspace. Balan was not very engaging, with the basic gameplay, the controls, camera, and its performance being among some, but not all of people's gripes. His demo created a summoning circle that brought forth this negative miasma that hung around the project from then all the way up until its launch, and it never really went away. The feedback was bad enough.
Про тебя что ли говорят? Что ты так? Я понял. Чего болит спина? От того, что не болит. Не болит. Наоборот, нет, наоборот. Наоборот. Нифига не взял ты на себя, да. Не заварился просто, и все, да. Да. Вот наоборот, я не знаю, понимаешь, я себя чувствую, знаешь, я не буду говорить дальше. Опа. А что остается?
Ничего не это. Шире печеньки, шире. Та работа наберет, наверное.
Так сильно не убивай, так тоже, да, понимаешь, а просто потому что вдруг ты еще проживешь сколько-то лет как-то. Ну, понимаешь. Я ничего тебе не хочу сказать. Хорошего, тем более плохого. Тем более хорошего. Содержание собак опять удалилось. И зачем собак так удаляешься все? Щенятки. Капитулируем. Ладно. Короче, играть-то можно, да? Короче, тут все хорошо, да? 9:07. Не совсем зря день меня пришел. Хотел музыкантом быть. Перешел, я помню, по-своему говорил, да. Ну, это мой подход такой. Он не очень, смотри, что у меня говорится, как бы, да, то есть делаю выводы, короче, да. Ну да, еще, что женщине не надо желать помогать ему сделать. Да, то есть как бы мешать не надо. А мешать не надо. Не знаю, примерно. Ладно, зачем? Женщина не слабая же, как слабый пол. Зачем обижать? Надо хорошо обидеть, чтобы последствия остались. Ну вот это имеешь в виду. Ты же хочешь сказать, что лучше бы меня не было? Не надо было обижать мою маму, чтобы лучше меня не было. Я не готов с этим согласиться, скажем так, да. Возможно, она тоже, да. Возможно, понимает. Возможно, ты... Каждый способ, наоборот, вранье просто, понимаешь? Да. Твой организм не хочет отказываться от жизни, я тебе точно говорю. Это просто программа, у тебя сверху записана программа смерти, а внутри жизнь. Ну да. Ничего страшного. Для нас специально же время идет. Ты не согласен, что ли? Спасибо. Нет, public domain. А, ну у меня что ли? Так. Спасибо, прощения. Нет, я же не грубо говорю. Грубо что ли? Это грубо получилось, да? Нет, вот жизнь продолжается, как ее дальше продолжать? Надо позвать ее просто. Продиджи, все продиджи. Вот это и прикинь, не выполнить, не прикалывать. Бывало и хорошо. Кто здесь? Зачем? Зачем падаешь выше, да? Хорошо идти. Терминал.